There's a story in the Talmud, in the Gemara, which coincidentally we were talking about this morning while we were learning before shul started. Coincidentally, we also talked about at Shabbat dinner last night. Not entirely sure what's going on, but there's a Gemara on the mind of everyone. But there's a story in the Talmud in Masechet Bava Metzia that is perhaps the most quintessentially Jewish story ever. So the way that it goes is that there is an oven, and it's cut up into parts, and sand is placed between the parts, and Rabbi Eliezer maintained that it's pure, meaning that it's not susceptible to ritual impurity. And the other sages said that it is susceptible to ritual impurity. So on that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought them all sorts of proofs, but they were rejected. Said he to them, "If the law is as I say, may the carob tree prove it." So the carob tree uproots itself from its place a distance of 100 cubits, and others say 400 cubits. And the rabbis respond to him, "One cannot prove anything from a carob tree." Rabbi Eliezer responds to them, "If the law is as I say, may the aqueduct prove it." The water in the aqueduct began to flow backwards. So they say to him, "One cannot prove anything from an aqueduct." So he says to them, "If the law is as I say, may the walls of the Beit Midrash, may the walls of the house of study prove it." And the walls of the house of study began to fall in. That's right, Ivan. You knew it. So Rabbi Yehoshua rebuked them and said, "If Torah scholars are debating a point of Jewish law, what are your qualifications to intervene?" So the walls did not fall in deference to Rabbi Yehoshua, nor did they straighten up in deference to Rabbi Eliezer. So still to this day, we read in the Talmud, they are at a slant. So he responds to them, Rabbi Eliezer, "If the law is as I say, may it be proven from heaven itself." And therefore, then issued a bat kol, a heavenly voice, a divine voice, God's voice, opening up from the heavens and proclaiming, "What do you want of Rabbi Eliezer? The halacha is as he says. The law is as he says it." And Rabbi Yehoshua stands on his feet and says these words that come from our Torah portion this morning, "Lo b'shamayim hi." The Torah is not in heaven. We take no notice of heavenly voices, since you, God, have already at Sinai written in the Torah to follow the majority opinion. God gets outvoted. God gets outvoted. And Rabbi Natan subsequently met Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, and asked him, "By the way, what did God do at that moment?" And Eliyahu responds, "God smiled and laughed and said, 'My children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me.'" The rabbis in this story outsmart God. Want to guess who was responsible for writing the Talmud? The rabbis, right? But kidding aside, this is really important Agada. This is a really important story because it instructs us, it gives us a critical narrative about Jewish life. Lo b'shamayim hi. Torah isn't in the heavens. It's down here with us as we do our best to try to figure it out. And we have to try because there's so much that doesn't make sense. And I'm not talking about the purity status of an oven anymore. I'm talking about the things in our life, those big questions that we desperately want answers to, where we'd give anything for the heavens to open up, for a bat kol, for a divine voice to tell us what it all means, why it's necessary, or what good is going to come from this. This Agada tells us it's not going to happen. That voice isn't going to come. And if it does, what are we supposed to do? Ignore it. Because lo b'shamayim hi. Because the Torah isn't in heaven. The answers don't exist in heaven. They exist in what we create, what we work through together. Tomorrow night, the world is reborn. Jews around the world will be dipping apples in honey and eating pomegranate seeds as simanim, as symbols of the sweetness and beauty of life and the limitless potential of a new year. And at the same time, for some of our brothers and sisters, for many of our brothers and sisters, those simanim, those symbols will feel in dissonance with the reality of the world around them. Honey on their apples, yet so many tough questions on their hearts. Legitimate questions. Holy questions. And the answers can't come from anywhere other than from us. It's not about outsmarting God. It's not about rejecting God or stubbornly ignoring God. It's about actualizing God's Torah through the vessels of God's creation. And those vessels are us. And that, my friends, is what these days of awe, these Yamim Noraim, are all about. Not about begging God to save us, but manifesting God's mercy and compassion and goodness and love so that we can save each other. There's a joke, and many of you know this one, but bear with me here for a moment. There's a joke that there's a man who is stuck in a flood and turns to God for help. As the floodwaters rise, he stands on his porch and prays to God that God will save him from drowning. Just then, a man comes by in a rowboat. And the man reaches out his hand and says, "Get in, get in." But the man shakes his head. "No thanks. I'm waiting for God to rescue me." And the floodwaters keep rising, and the man retreats up to the second floor of his home, and he opens the window and he prays to God, asking for God to save him. And just then, a man in a motorboat pulls up to the window. He reaches out his hand and he says to the man, "Get in, get in." But the man once again shakes his head. "No thanks. I'm waiting for God to rescue me." The waters continue to rise, and the man climbs higher and higher, pulling himself onto his roof while the water starts to lap at his ankles. He closes his eye and prays to God that God will save him. And just then a helicopter hovers over his head. A rope ladder comes tumbling out of the door, and the pilot shouts down from his seat, climb up, get in." But again, the man shakes his head. "No thanks. I'm waiting for God to rescue me." And the helicopter flies off, and shortly thereafter, the water covers the man, and he drowns. And when he opens his eyes, he finds himself in heaven before the Holy One, blessed be God, and he speaks to God and says, "God, I was a man of faith. Why didn't you rescue me?" To which God responds, "I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want from me?" So that's the joke. That's the joke, right? But like all good jokes, the humor is in the profound truth of it. Because in reality, the beauty of the story is that God didn't send 2 boats and a helicopter. 2 people in 2 boats and 1 person in a helicopter went out of their way to save the life of another human being. That's what God sent. 3 compassionate people who saw someone in need and went to help. Lo b'shamayim. It's not in heaven. It's here. That's what it's all about. That's what these days are all about. That is what the sound of shofar is all about. It's what prayer is all about. It's what tshuva and tikkun and kapara and all of those big words that we hear at this time of year, it's what all of it is about. Not to be the man praying on the roof, but to be the people in the boats and the helicopter finding those that need us most. I've got a lot of big questions on my heart right now. And I know that many of you do too. But I am so thankful, I am so incredibly thankful that we get to work on those questions together. That we aren't waiting for carob trees and aqueducts to give us miracles and placate us, but that our sweetness, our Torah, our bat kol, come from one another. As the world prepares for rebirth, for renewal, may we all find the strength and the goodness and the love to take up the holy task before us. May this year push us to love one another, to fight for one another, to save one another. Because all of it, the holy car, the whole essence of it all, is right here. It's right here. Shabbat Shalom, and wishing you all a Shana Tova Umetuka. May it be a good and beautiful, sweet new year ahead.